Hello and welcome to Tell Muses, a storytelling podcast for storytellers, with storytellers, all about storytelling and the wonderful world of stories. And we are now in season 2 of our Tell Muses podcast. We couldn't be happier that we're doing this. And of course, I'm Simona, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Despina. Hello, Despina.
Hi, Simona. How happy we are to start season 2 of this lovely podcast. And this year, our podcast is going to be under the wing of Get a Word in Edgeways Festival, located in Wenlock, England, directed by Mike Rust. So this is going to be part of that wonderful, warm little festival we love.
Yes, thank you, Get Word in Edgeways. Well, the format is always the same. So Despina and I would like to meet as many storytellers as we can from all over the world. And our first guest today is the wonderful Shane Ibbs. So, hello, Shane, and thank you so
Hi.
much for being with us.
Thanks for the invite, and good to see you both on screen.
Lovely to have you here, Shane. Thanks for doing this
Well,
with
thank you
us.
for the invite. Yeah, thank you.
So, I think this time, Simone, I'm going to start with a different kind of question than my normal one. I know you were not expecting
Oh no,
this, right?
changes, changes. I wasn't expecting this.
Changes, all of a sudden, surprises. But as you said, we have with us today Shane Ibbs. And Shane, I know there's a story behind that surname. Would you like to share it?
I'm laughing because, yeah. Um, so it's because I know where the story's going. I'm already laughing. Yeah. So the name Ibbs is very rare, actually, and my father passed away when I was quite young, so I wasn't at an age where I was 21, but I wasn't really at that stage where I wanted to really look at the family tree, if you like. I knew my granddad and my grandma on my dad's side. And but as I got a bit older, as we often do, we want to know a bit more about our ancestry and our, and I became curious, and we wondered if it was a derivation of Ibsen or Ibstock, sort of Scandinavian type names. We'd heard somewhere a whisper that possibly Scandinavian, but that was a red herring. And we just couldn't work out where this name came from. And there's very few of us, actually, very, very few. And then my brother one day, when the internet sort of began to come about, he did a Google search or whatever it was then, and he came up with a village called Saint Hippolytus in the UK. And we thought, oh, that's interesting, And then I went to a map and this, that, and the other. And then we found a link with Saint Ibbs, and we thought, wow, this is like really interesting. So we thought we must go. So we went to Saint Hippolytus, and we went into the church, and we went through some of the records, and I found a relative traced back to 1599, a Faith Ibbs, a woman, Faith Ibbs. I don't know any more about her than that. The St. Ibbs bit was there was a main road with several kind of quite big houses on it, and each house was called St. Ibbs and then a number. So I don't know if this is true or not, but in my mind, I wondered, was she a servant and she took the local name? Because, I mean, 420 odd years ago, things like that's kind of happened. I haven't got any evidence for that. But anyway, but while we was doing the research, I came across a story about one of my ancestors from, 300 years ago. I'm one of 6 children, by the way, and that's relevant because this relative of mine had many children. And times back then were very poor. I don't come from, landed gentry, which won't surprise anybody. I come from a very ordinary background. And I found out about this guy. The family was poor. one winter, and in England, every now and again we get a very harsh winter, which lasts longer than normal, and we just get them every 20, 30 years or something. It was one of these very bitterly cold winters. Um, Everywhere was kind of frozen up and snow, and food was very scarce, and they found themselves with no food to feed the children. There was 5 kids, and I see proud people, and very resourceful, and I sort of learned that he was the same, really. Um, and he didn't want to ask, he didn't want to beg, basically. He wanted to try and get food in some way that he could. And he didn't know what to do. Um, but he said to his wife, well, I'm going to, apparently, so I'm going to go and see the vicar. So he went to see the vicar, and she said, please come back with something to eat. I don't care if it's got feathers or fur or whatever, just or scales or just bring back something, food, some meat of some description. He said, well, I'll do my best, my love, kind of thing. And he went to the vicar, and he told the vicar, and the vicar wanted to give him some what we call alms, which is money, ALMS. And he said, no, I don't want money. I want to get the food myself, but I don't know how to. And the vicar said, He said, can you shoot? And he said, no. He said, I have an old gun. He said, you could gladly take that. He said, I can go through what you need to do to shoot it, and perhaps you could shoot something. He said, well, I'll try anything, kind of thing. And it was one of these kind of guns. Before you had a shotgun, you had sometimes they're called blunderbusses, but it's kind of where you put a shot in, lots of sort of lead balls. And apparently you have to put, which is the right way around. You put in some wadding first, like a bit of cloth or something, and you have to ram it down with a ramrod. Then you put the lead shot in. You prime it with your gunpowder, and then you shoot. And he explained all this to him, and he said, but the thing with the ramrod, he said, whatever you do, you must take that out and fix it back underneath the barrel and shoot. And he said, well, I can manage that kind of thing. So he said, I'll bring it back when I've got something, and off he went, and he left the village. And around that area that I've described, there is fields, then there's a small wood, and once you get the other side of the wood, there is a lake, a small lake. It's not a big lake, but it's a small lake. And he went there because he thought that, I'm either going to find a rabbit somewhere, or maybe there'll be some wildfowl, a duck or something on the lake. And he got there, and the lake was virtually frozen over completely. But often, even in the coldest of winters, in the middle of a lake or a pond, often it's not frozen. And he was lucky it wasn't frozen. And he could see some wildfowl on there, what looked like ducks. And it's very well known for it in that area. And he got this gun, and he kind of looked at it, and he kind of scratched his head to sort of, and he, oh yeah, and he got a bit of wadding. I think he apparently tore a bit off his shirt and sort of put that in and ramrodded it in, and then he got a handful of the lead balls and he dropped them in. And when he did that, he rammed it in and already primed it with the gun. But he made a clattering sound, and it upset the ducks. It doesn't take much. And they just began to take off, and he very quickly pulled the gun up, apparently, and fired with the ramrod still in it. Well, he'd never fired a gun like that before. And I mean, I have, when I was younger, fired a gun, and they have a big kick on them. And this gun had a huge kick on it and knocked him off his feet. And what he didn't know is, while he was doing this with the gun, and there was a hare watching him, and he fell straight on this hare and broke the hare's neck. And he thought, oh, I've got a hare for the pot. He couldn't believe it. I've got a hare for the pot. But he thought, I bet I've got a duck. And well, to get the ducks, he had to get out onto the ice. So very carefully, gingerly, he kind of walked across the ice, and it was thick enough. But of course, as he got closer to the middle, it started to thin out a little bit. But he got there, and he could see, well, he found it unbelievable, actually, and you probably will too. This ramrod had gone through, it hit the duck. Well, I say the duck, it actually hit 3 ducks in a row, boom, 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 boom. And it got these 3 ducks. And because the 3 of them pinned with this ramrod was so heavy, they splashed into the pond, the water, the lake. And there was only a trout swimming past right at that moment, and it speared the trout too. When he took this ramrod out with 3 ducks that he'd speared and a trout, he couldn't believe his luck. Well, he turned to move, and of course, He'd forgotten how thin the ice was where he was, and he didn't think about his footing. And the ice just snap, it went, and splash, he went into the water. Freezing cold, he gasped for air. He's bouncing about in this water. Well, the edge of the ice, where it had only just started to freeze, was like a razor blade. And he bounced up against it, and it sliced his head completely off. And his head plopped into the water. But he didn't panic. Because in a crisis, us Ibbses, we don't panic. He thought about what he needed to do. He put his hand underneath the water. He found his head. He grabbed hold of the hair. He took it back out and he put it onto his shoulders. And he fitted it nicely on his shoulders, and he was bouncing about in the water, waiting for it to frizz over. And once it had frizz over and it was fixed back onto his neck, he climbed out of the ice, gingerly picked up the ducks and the trout, and gingerly, just carefully walked across the ice very gently to where the hare lay. And he picked up the hare. Well, he had an armful of food that would last the family for days and days and days. He was so pleased, but he was soaked through. He was freezing cold. He walked back home. He tried the door, and the door was bolted of his own home. Well, he knocked on the door, and his wife came to the door and said, "Who is it?" And he said, "It's me, you silly bugger." He said, "Let me in." And she slipped the bolt. She opened the door, and there he stood with all this food, all this meat and what have you. And he said, "Look what I've got." And she said, "Oh, that's wonderful and wonderful." He said, "Well, don't I deserve a kiss?" And he leant forward to give her a kiss. Well, he was so cold and wet, the snot was dripping off the end of his nose, and she refused to give him a kiss. And I don't understand that. But anyway, she refused to kiss him. But she told him to get into the house. She said, "Get in your house, get in the house." She said, "Get some warm clothes on." She said, "Give me that food, get some warm clothes on, sit by the fire and have a warm." So she took all the food into the kitchen to prepare it. He goes, he gets changed, he sits in his armchair right by the fire. And of course, all the kids are, "Daddy, Daddy." And they're clambering on him. And, "What did you do, Daddy? Tell us what happened. Tell us what you got, Daddy. How did you do it?" And all these questions that children have, you know. And he's sitting, he said, "Oh, get off me, children, get off me." He said, "I need to have warm." He said, "I'm chilled to the bone here." And he's having a lovely, lovely warm by the fire. Oh, it's so beautifully warm. Oh. And of course, the heat melted the ice and the cold, and his head rolled off into his lap, down his legs, and across the floor. He didn't panic. He said, "Wife, wife, wife." He said, "Get some ice in a tea towel and bring it in here." And she's like, "What on earth does he want?" Then she had some ice there, and she got the tea towel, and she came and he said, "My head's across the room." He said, "Can you pick it up and bring it over here?" And she picked his head up. He said, "Put it back on my shoulders." And she put his head back on his shoulders. And they put the ice and the tea towel around my neck, which he did, to frizz the head back onto his shoulders. And sure enough, after a short while, it was frozen back nice onto him. They sat and had the most magnificent feast that day. The food lasted a week. The snow and the ice ceased, and he was able to get food once again. But they ate like kings and queens for a whole week and more. And you know, whenever I tell that story to people, sometimes I get a clap, for the story, but I never bow to acknowledge it, just in case my head falls off.
It's
What a
brilliant.
wonderful tall tale. Totally credible, Shane. We believe
Yes,
every part, especially the
yes.
part where, in case anyone should have their head severed, not to panic for reason whatsoever. You just grab it, put it back, and
uh,
put some ice around it, and that's fine.
that's
Or
fine.
sew it if you have the skill to do some nice stitching. Yeah, that would work out too, I think.
I
Hopefully.
wonder if he had a sore throat of a kind after severing his head.
I guess he did. So I like to attribute stories if I can. So I first heard Taffy Thomas tell that story at Halsey Manor, maybe 10 years ago, 8, 10 years ago. And I heard it and I thought, "Oh my heavens, that could be my family." Because we are kind of like that. And I used to run a storytelling club, and my middle daughter was there, a young woman at the time. And she heard the story and she was believing it for quite a while, for too long, really. And she said, Dad, she said, no, in our family, I was just believing you up until it got ridiculous and then I didn't believe you anymore. So I attribute that to, I first heard that from Taffy Thomas.
It's a
Yeah.
Credits
brilliant
to
story.
Taffy then. Let us hope he's well.
Yes, I believe he is. I'm just trying to think who saw him recently. Someone I know saw him recently and said I was talking to them, and they said he was very well actually. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, it's Peter Monk. It's Peter Monk because he Halsey Manor is on once a year, kind of folk tales and what have we, it's part of Taffy's thing that he does each year. And Peter went down there and said, yeah, Taffy was in good spirits. Yeah.
Good to know. Good to know.
Wonderful. So I'll go since Despina started with a different question. I'll go with Despina's usual question mixed with my usual question. So Shane, can you please tell us who you are in simple terms and how your passion for stories started?
Yeah. So who I am is an interesting question because it kind of I keep morphing into other parts of myself. And I think as David Bowie said, the older you get, the more you grow into who you are, or who you should be. I spend quite a bit of time as a professional storyteller, um, a lot in the summer actually. I'm also a trained counsellor, therapist, but I've been running that down over recent years actually, and with the move that I'm doing quite soon, I think I'll probably stop that work. And I also help teach bushcraft part time, mainly in the summer. But I just did a week a couple of weeks ago. I do a bit in the Easter holidays as well, and in between that, I do the odd day or two to help this guy in Surrey. And when I go, I normally stay in the wood
Can
because
we
it's too far.
elaborate a bit on that, Shane? Because not many people know what exactly bushcraft is. Would you like to explain to our listeners?
Yes, that's a good point. Actually, yeah, a lot of people don't realise what it is. It's basically um, learning how to live and survive in the wood. But of course, we live in modern times, so I don't trap my food like my ancestor did when I had to shoot his food. You could, you could trap food and stuff. It's not really what I want to do. But living and surviving in the wood is about finding the right place to sleep safely. It's about making sure you've got enough water, enough food. It's about how to forage and make a fire from the ingredients around, the materials around you. It's about how to cook on an open fire. It's how to keep that fire going if you need to. It's how to stay warm, how to stay dry. It's about recognizing maybe mushrooms and things that you can eat, which I do. I do forage mushrooms and eat, and maybe some berries. Um, I also carve spoons, wooden spoons, and spatulas and different bits and pieces. So there's a lot of knives and axe skills that I use. Um, and many more things really. I'm probably taking some things for granted that people, I like to watch birds and the creatures and find out about them, the different plants, the trees. Just this is all bushcraft, really. I mean, sewing can be bushcraft. I've been sewing my woolen socks. I've been darning my socks recently. That's bushcraft, really, because you're looking after your gear. I know how to sharpen knives and axes and things, and I teach that. Um, so they're all kind of bushcraft is a huge subject, actually. Um, yeah, and some of it I delve into, and some of it I don't. So, and I help teach children mainly these skills, which I enjoy a lot. And part of that is the guy who I work for, sort of subcontractor, if you like. He has two young children, and he found out that I was a storyteller about 8 years ago, and he asked me if he could come along to one of the gigs with his children. It was a daytime gig. And I said yes. And he came along and he loved what I did. And he said, could we add storytelling to the bushcraft day each day of the week that we do it? And I said, I'd love to. So for 7 or 8 years, when we have the week-long group of young people, they get 45 minutes of stories every day. And some of these children have been coming for 2 or 3 years, and now they're starting to ask me to repeat certain stories again. And they're a year older, so they hear something different in the story. And I often tell stories that are to do with woodlands or nature or creatures, and I often try and associate it with the things in the wood if I can. A little bit of ecology in there as well. I don't sort of ram it down people's throats, but I like to just sew it in very subtly so they get thinking about things rather than preach it. I like to just subtly put things in there about the ecology of the wood and the planet, really. Um, so that's kind of mainly what I do. Um,
Sounds a bit like what scouts do, right?
Say again, I missed a word there.
Similar to scouts, but with stories.
Yeah, I think there is. I think there is an overlay actually with the Scouts. I was in the Cubs, but not the Scouts, and I think there is a similarity because we also have some children that stay overnight. Not always, but we get them to set up camp for themselves with a hammock and a tarp as a roof to keep the rain off or the sun off or whatever. Um, and yeah, some of these skills will definitely be scouting skills. Yeah, yeah, for sure. You know, how to learn how to do certain knots, how to do certain cuts with a knife to keep yourself safe. There's different types of cuts and things, and cuts in the wood, I mean, not cuts in your hand. Different ways to use an axe, how to use an axe safely. You know, there's quite a few things that you need to do to keep safe with an axe, etc., etc. So yeah, there is a crossover with scouts, actually, I guess.
You know what? I have a question for you. As a parent, we sometimes go overboard thinking of what could actually go wrong. This is how
Yes,
a parent's brain works. But
yes,
in what you do, you have to work with young children, quite young, and they get
yes,
to handle sharp objects.
yes.
So my question is, how do you do that safely?
It's a really, really good and very important question because I've seen both sides of the coin. So we teach three dominant safety rules, and we go over and over and over them every time the knives come out or the axes. We also use something called a kukri, which looks like a machete, which is a, many parts of the world that's a tool. These are tools. It's a tool for making things and cutting down things, etc. And so every time they come out to be used, we go through all the safety rules with the children, and we need to know that those children can tell us what they are before we let them use the tools. And then we highly supervise that. And you have to have eyes in the back of your head sometimes. You have to be very switched on because we could sometimes see dangerous practice and we intervene immediately. And we go over what's safe. Um, One of the lucky things we have, I guess, is because some of these children keep coming back, they know the safety rules. So when we get new children, they can observe them as well for us. They can tell them, don't come in my safety bubble, for instance, and all this kind of stuff. Um, but it is about teaching these safety rules. And once you teach those safety rules, we do occasionally get a little nick. I have to be honest. It's sometimes a child will cut a finger. But we've never had a really bad injury. Um, Never had a bad injury. A little nick occasionally, that does happen. If you're going to use a sharp instrument, it's going to happen whatever you do. If you're a seamstress, you're probably going to prick your finger with a needle occasionally. Do you know what I mean? It's one of the things. But if you teach the safety rules and you watch the children until you know they're safe with the tools, the cuts are they're never bad cuts. Um, and there is a thing out there, Despina, about risky. Well, they call it risky play. I think we should also add that you need to do risky things. I did as a child, and it teaches you an immense amount of things for life. And children are too cotton wool, I'm afraid. I really believe that. Well, the research tells us they
In
are actually.
comparison to our generation,
Absolutely,
shamefully.
absolutely.
And we
But
grew up with nothing but risky play.
nothing but risky play, exactly. And we're all still here. Um, but yes, but you do have to have the rules, and we are very switched on when it's tool time. We have designated tool times, and you only can have the tools then, and we are very switched on at those moments. Yeah.
Brilliant. And while we're talking about bushcraft, I have a question for you because you mentioned that you tell stories during these bushcraft events. And I was
Yes.
wondering if you could tell us what it feels like and what you think is the impact of telling stories in an environment such as a wood and How does it feel like? What do you think is the impact on the children that you tell stories to in that environment?
Yeah, that's another really good question. Um, yeah, it's such a good question. I've been thinking about that a lot this last year, actually. So that, oh, I could talk about this at length, and I mustn't really because it would take up a lot of time. But I think it depends in what context the children are there for. So if we have a school, generally we have teachers, and it's a more of a teachy type environment. So the children follow the rules more. Whereas when we run our 1 week workshops for children, which often they're children that come from disadvantaged backgrounds, or they might be young carers, sometimes their worlds and their lives can be a bit chaotic, and we see that mirrored in when they're there. So sometimes the storytelling can be a little bit, mm, a little, not chaotic's too strong a word, but they can be very distracted. So I work quite a lot at how to keep them focused and that. And it's just small things that things like long sticks. You can't have a long stick in the storytelling circle. Um, but I don't mind fiddle things. So you can have a leaf to fiddle with, or a branch just to move around in your hands, or a bit of bark or something, because that helps a lot. It helps me actually. I like something to fiddle with. So we have things like that. Um, and I think the weather makes a difference. If it's a very windy day, often children are more hyper. Um, Whereas if it's a calm day, they're less hyper. Um, but what I think the wood gives is um, some sort of freedom. Um, which is really hard to put into words. Sometimes I've sat where the children sit when they're not there. I sit and I just think, I put a stool where I sit and I just look and think, other than me, what are they looking at? So I've got an idea of what they're looking at. And they've got these big trees and different things and bushes. And I just think, so when they want to just take their gaze away from me, they're looking at nature and the trees. And we know green plants are very soothing for people. Um, and the children do begin to soothe down with the stories. That's definitely what happens. Um, and I try and use the environment around me if I can. I might have a story with a big oak tree in it, and I'll say, one of the great oaks, and I might look at one of the trees and say at the bottom there's a hole where a fairy family lives, so I kind of make that connection with the nature as well. Um, I used to do a walk with the children. I haven't done that for probably 3 years actually. I used to walk and tell stories around the wood, and I keep thinking maybe I should go back to doing that actually. Um, but we also have a tent there, which can be dark sometimes in the tent, and sometimes I go in there to tell stories, particularly if it's very wet, and that changes the stories completely because it's enclosed, it's dark, it hugs you, and I tell the stories differently. I just do. It's amazing what happens to me actually. So they get this variety of ways of telling stories. Um, yeah, yeah,
I have a
yeah.
question, Shane. We have not yet fully answered Simona's question because there is this story hanging in there about how you got into storytelling to begin with.
Oh,
But
yes,
before we
yes.
get back to that, and just
Okay.
mention it so we don't lose our thread of thought, a little parenthesis in the middle. So, since we're talking about nature and what it does to you as a storyteller and what it does to you as a person, I'd like to dig a little deeper in Shane Ibbs. I know
Sure.
that maybe once a year, I don't know if it's a yearly event, you do some sort of really extreme survival
Oh, yeah.
getaway, like in
Yes,
the deep north or something, right?
yes.
Like really harsh conditions. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that? It's very intriguing for me.
Yeah. Oh, each subject I could talk immensely about at length, but I will shrink it down. So, I had quite a tough childhood. I'm one of 6 kids. We weren't very wealthy. We were quite poor actually, and times were very tough. And I had a tough childhood. And we only had one fire in the living room, and the bedrooms were freezing cold, and we were cold all the time, and all this kind of stuff. So I kind of had that harsh upbringing. And part of my life, I've worked outdoors at different times in my life through winters and stuff. But there's something about surviving and dealing with the harsh environment, which really gives your character something. And I think as I got older, I lost my way a little bit. I worked for a local authority, and I worked for a charity for 7 years, working with children, therapeutic work, and what have we. And I began to lose my way a little bit, and I needed to kind of get grounded again with nature. And that's why I started going back into the woods to work, and then I wanted to step it up a bit. And I'm a dreamer. And I didn't leave the country, the UK, to have a holiday until I was about 24, 25. I went to Greece. I went to Rhodes, actually. And it blew my mind that this other world was out there, because I was just a local kid doing local stuff and not much more, really. Um, and so I got a little bit of a taste for adventure, but mortgages and kids and da, 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 da. And then I just thought, I want to do these adventures, and I've always done something, but I just wanted to push myself even more. Could I do it? Not like still do, could I do that extreme? And I did some bushcraft with a guy out in Sheffield, and then he put together a winter trip to Sweden, to northern Sweden, just below the Arctic Circle, near the Sami people. And I thought, I've got to do that. And I talked to the guy I worked with in bushcraft in Surrey, Ian, and he said, I'll come with you. And he's an ex-army captain. He said, he's a lot younger than me. He said, I'll come with you. And I said, oh, yeah, let's go. And we went. And I did loads of research before. And I was a bit nervous because it's extremely cold. And, you can die of hypothermia, at the extreme. You can fall into the ice, all this kind of stuff. So I went there and we slept. We had what we call a hot tent, which is a canvas tent, so not that hot. We cut loads of boughs off the fir trees to lay down first. It was like an insulation layer. We had a roll mat and then a sleeping bag and what have we. And we had a little wood burning stove, which is where we cooked our food on it. And also our clothes, if they got wet in the day, you hung them up high and it dried them out. So we had that as the main survival base, but they also wanted to teach us how to survive outdoors with no fire, which is very extreme. Because you could make a fire and have the fire going all night outdoors, but they wanted to show us you can actually survive without fire if you know what you're doing. And we were with two very experienced guys, one guy in particular, very, very experienced guy, younger than me, but so experienced. Um, and I fir tree, and you brush off the bottom branches because you're going to use them. There's snow everywhere. You cut out a step in the snow, so you've got a snow platform to lay on. You build up all the snow around it, so it's a little bit like an igloo around the tree, but the tree forms the roof. And then you've got this platform to sleep on. Those branches that you've brushed off, the fir branches, you lay them down first, then your mat, then a waterproof bivy bag, then your sleeping bag, and then your merino underwear and all the rest of it, long johns and what have we. And that's how you sleep. And you put the hood and you put a hat on and your thick gloves, thick socks and what have we. And the thing that I forgot to do is so funny. My big thick boots, I kept them outside my sleeping bag because I didn't think about it. And overnight, because everything froze, and when I got up in the morning, my boots were frozen. Solid. I could get them on because they were big boots. I could get them on, but they were frozen solid. So the next time I put them inside my sleeping system so they don't freeze. But oh my heavens! I mean, it was a bit of a rough night, in and out of sleep and stuff. But I woke up with a fine like talcum powder of snow all over me because it had gone through the branches in the night. But to wake up in that magic land and you realize where you are all of a sudden. I can't describe what it's like. I get it when I sleep in the wood. If I sleep outdoors in the wood in a hammock, when you wake up and you just see the wood, you forget where you're sleeping for that first few seconds of wake, and suddenly you're in this magnificent wood. Oh my heavens alive! It's just one of the most best feelings in the world. Um, so I spent a week there, and I then did a second week the next year. I did it again, and slept in a different way outdoors. Um, and it really tests you because it's very wearing in the cold. It really wears your body down. You have to eat lots of food. You have to keep on the move. You have to keep changing your layers because if you sweat lots, you're wet on the inside and you can get really cold quickly. So you have to constantly take layers on and off to monitor your heat. You have to work in that environment. Um, the snow was waist deep. If you went off the track, you'd go in up to your waist, and it's hard to get out of that sort of snow because you can't push against it. So we were taught how to get out of that. We were taught how to cross a frozen river safely, how to walk across a frozen lake safely, um, etc., etc. So it was extreme, I guess. I just thought it was great fun. Um, but it was extreme. Yeah, yeah. And some people say to me, why do you do that, Shane? And it's to test myself. Can I survive this? As a person, it's about a personal journey for me. I love the snow as well, I have to say. I love
And in
snowy
case you
cold.
cannot, you say, "Oh
Pardon?
bugger, I couldn't survive this after all," right? If you cannot survive, you're like, "Oh bugger, I couldn't survive this after all."
Well, that sometimes happens for some people. Some people really struggle with it, because you can get very cold. I didn't get very cold because I did so much research on bringing the right gear with me, the right clothing. And of course, one of the best bits was we saw the aurora. The first trip we didn't. The second year we saw the aurora, and oh my heavens alive! Apparently afterwards, the guy whose land we were on, the Swede whose land we was on, he said, "What you saw last night, even us Swedes don't see very often." And it's called a corona aurora, and it's like an explosion in the sky with this beautiful green and yellow, and it just kind of went. There was no noise. I'm adding the noise. In my head, it was going, and it just spread and
People
spread and
listen
spread.
cannot see you. Yeah, yeah. He's
Oh,
making movements, guys, with his hands,
oh.
like something starts from a small scale and turns into a bigger and bigger, bigger and a bigger one.
Yeah, and it just fills the whole sky from a central place. It's like an explosion in a sense of this beautiful color. And all us men, we were all men there. We were like little boys watching it. Honestly, our what we were saying and like, oh look, wow, we were just like little boys. It was amazing, and I've seen something that I've always wanted to see. So, you know, I'm pleased about that.
It does sound amazing, really. I mean, like, Aurora Borealis is something most people would like to see at least once in their lives. It's in my bucket list, but not while camping out in the cold, to be honest. I mean, most people would try to get out of such a situation, let alone put themselves into it. But
Yeah, my
yeah,
partner thinks I'm completely mad.
yeah, it's okay. You're mad in a good way, I guess.
Yeah,
You
I think
survived,
so.
didn't you?
I,
Yeah.
yes, twice.
And I think it's good for storytellers as well. We tell so many stories about people in extreme conditions, and if we haven't lived those conditions ourselves, uh, we don't really know what we're talking about. So I
Yes,
think if we try to live that kind of thing ourselves, so we know what we are talking about. We can add so much more into the stories that we tell.
it's very true. I tell quite a lot of Northern Hemisphere stories, in the cold zone. I love Inuit stories. I love Native American stories that where they're in the cold zone. And I love Scandinavian stories too. So I do that. That comes through in my storytelling. Something will just pop up, and it'll become part of the story. And
And
um,
you can add so much sensory info into it now from your own experience, the things you have experienced as a person.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, yeah. You really can, and we know if we're seeing it in our mind's eye, often our audience is seeing it as well. We know this through research. We know that the audience often sees what we're seeing.
Yeah, but you can see something in your mind's eye. I can imagine it, but having been there puts also smells and feels and
Yes.
more things that you
Well,
can imagine.
you raise a really interesting point there, Despina, because I know you're Greek and you live in Greece, and Simone, you're Italian, but although the north, so perhaps not quite so hot as the south part of Italy. But yeah, you raise an interesting point about if you've never experienced that, how do we, how can we visualize it? And I guess the beauty of stories, what I've learned is, as long as you do the work on the story, there's so many layers to a story. Some of the layers will hit each individual audience member on a different level, and that's what's important. So you don't have to know everything or visualize everything. You will visualize and connect with what touches you, and that's what I think is important with stories for sure.
I will keep our thread of thought in order, along with our ducks. So back to
Yes.
Simona's first question. How
Oh
did you
yes,
get
yes.
into storytelling to begin with?
Yes, so okay, such a good question. I will get there eventually. Thank you for realigning me. So when I'm the oldest of six children. So when I was a kid, my dad, he used to tell us stories. Red Riding Hood, the Three Little Pigs, Jack and the Beanstalk, the Grey Lady, which is a local story to where I used to live. Story of the Grey Lady. In fact, I've been looking for her in the graveyard when I was younger. This ghost of the Grey Lady. I never saw her. So he used to tell us some of these stories, and I loved them. Um, and then my siblings, as they came along, I began to sometimes tell them the stories. Um, and then my dad, as we got a bit older, he would tell us stories about his life and the things that he got up to. And I still don't know which was true and which was a fib or which was an exaggeration, and all the rest of it. But I sort of got a love for stories then. Um, I grew up in a house with no books. Uh, didn't read a book until I was about 13. I read Call of the Wild, which is a story in the cold frontier. I mean, wow, go figure. Um, you know, um, and it opened my mind to stories, and then I began to read a lot after that, and I love short stories in particular. Um, and and life just sort of went on, and then there's a period in the 90s which the dates evade me a little bit. Several things happened at the same time. So I trained as a social worker, and I was able to work directly with children, like what they call direct work with children. And you need to use different skills for that. And I began to use a story frame with these children. So you just give them the little cues for each part, but they fill in the gaps. So it becomes their story, their narration of a story. So I began to do that. Around that time, I also visited Canada, Manitoba, which is up near the cold part and very cold in the winter. And I knew a family therapist and his wife, and I believe she was from the Indigenous people. And I got invited to an Indigenous Day, a ceremony of the Métis people. And it was a big gathering of people, Indigenous people. Me and Frank, who's in Italian actually, Canadian Italian, we were the only two white faces there. And we joined, and part of the ceremony, which went on all day, we had a sweat lodge and all sorts of things. In the middle of the day was a story share, and it was a real life story share with a lot of people. And I was invited to tell a story too, which I did, a real life story. And it was one of the most heart-wrenching but uplifting experiences of my life. Some of these people were quite broken, and I had tears in my eyes. But some of them had, moved on and kind of got beyond their trauma and stuff. So you had that mixture, which I guess is quite important to have. But it really showed me what you could do with story. It's certainly real stories, real life stories. And I came back from that, and I began to use them in my work more. Then I trained as a therapist and a family therapist. I'm not a family therapist, but I did family therapy work, as a bit of a distinction there. And I began to use stories in that as well. And around this time, this 3, 4, 5 years, I saw John Rowe in the mid 90s, who many people will know. And I was out for a day with my kids in this park where there was things going on, and there was a little wooded area. And we went round this corner, and there was this colourful man sat on a tree stump telling fairy tales. And I listened to him. I think I probably enjoyed it more than my two kids at the time did. And I just thought, oh, wow, this is brilliant. I'd love to do this. But then life took over, and I completely forgot about it. And then a few years after that, I won't go into the details of family problems and stuff, and divorce and and I just hit a wall basically, um, and things weren't working out, and I was a bit down, and I went and did an ecotherapy day which is how you connect in a deep way with nature in a therapeutic way. And we used earth, fire, water, and air, and all this kind of stuff. We did a bit of meditation and stuff. And the next day and something shifted in me, and I didn't know what it was. And the next day I was at home on my own. I went on the internet, and suddenly this big smiling sun came up, and I thought, "Oh, that's curious. What is that?" And I pressed it, and it went into Emerson College, the International School of Storytelling. And I just thought, "Oh, wow, I could do this." And there was a little hut, and it was called the hut, and there was just a picture of a little hut, and I just thought, "Oh, I couldn't sit in there with like 10 people all shoulder to shoulder and have to tell a story," because I was, people don't believe I could be quite shy. I was very shy. I was more shy then of certain things anyway. That was too exposing for me. So I got up and I distracted myself and I made a cup of tea. And I had this dialogue in my head: "You're distracting yourself, aren't you, Shane?" "Yes, I am." "Why?" "You're scared, aren't you?" "Yes, I am." "But what's the worst thing that you've overcome?" "It's not like that, is it?" "No." "Well, so pay your money then." So I went back I looked in it again. I, I read it all again, and I got up again and walked away. And my head was going, "Oh, you're really scared, aren't you, Shane?" And it was like I was in this dialogue with myself. Yeah, I'm really scared. But what's the worst that can happen? And I sort of questioned myself, and I thought, do you want to do it? That was the question. I thought, do you want to do this? Yes. So pay the deposit then. So I paid the deposit. I went down there. When I saw the little hut, what I transpired was that was the cloakroom to the really big hut, which was a relief because there was lots of space in the big hut. I could hide, not. Um, but anyway, I spent a weekend there looking at a couple of stories. And at the end of it, Sue Hollingsworth, who was one of the facilitators there, a wonderful woman, she pulled me to one side at the end when we were saying goodbyes. And she said, "Every now and again, someone comes here who must tell stories. Shane, you must tell stories." And I didn't know what she meant. And then I began to tell stories, and I did quite a few more courses. I did a 3-week course working with children with stories with Daniel Miller and Roy. And I've said Hugh Lupton I met, there was some Greek myth stories and bits and pieces over the years. And I was nervous to start with, um, but apparently I was already quite good, apparently. I don't know how you judge that, but anyway, but I was always a little bit nervous. And then I had this thing about singing because I was crucified by a teacher for singing when I was at middle school. And I thought I had to get over my singing fear. So I went to a singing teacher. She helped me get over my fear. And that catapulted me with storytelling to just do it, Shane. Don't be scared of anything. And I met Paul Jackson, who became my mentor, and he freed me up. And suddenly and then someone, Justine Demir, who we all know, I think, she saw me a year later and went, "You're already good, Shane, but wow, what's happened to you?" I said, "I've just let go, Justine. I've just let go." And when you do that with storytelling, don't try to, I just let go. It just changed it for me anyway. It changed everything. And since then, it's been non-stop storytelling for about, I don't know, 13, 14 years, something like that. Performing them, I mean, storytelling. Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand. You just let go of your fears and you're holding back, and it was what came
Yes.
out as a better result. Is that it?
Yes. Yes.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Try not to be too perfect.
Yeah.
Um, don't be word perfect.
Hmm.
It's all that kind of stuff. Just tell a story and connect with the story. That's what Paul began to teach me, and I think Hugh taught me that, and one or two others, is just connect with the story, you know. Um, and also, I think what I did, I came across Duncan Williamson. I never saw him live. I've seen some recordings and some audio recordings I've listened to since, and I fell in love with his stories. I've got almost all of his books, I think, and I just love the earthiness of his stories because it's me. It's like my childhood to some degree. It's like what I do in the woods. Um, so I tell a lot of Duncan stories, and um, I guess I find them easy to tell because I believe them. They're so believable, and I know a lot of the landscapes. I know the people. I know the creek. I mean, I used to spend a lot of time in a cafe when I was a teenager, observing people for years, too long really. But it gave me a huge amount of resources for my stories later in life. And I pull on all of this without realizing sometimes. Um, and just to go back to Gowie, actually, so part of the journey, just to round it all off a little bit. So I went to the first Gowie in the summer outdoors, and David Campbell was there, who I'd never met before. I didn't really know of him, and he was a great friend of Duncan Williamson, and he was
One moment, sorry. Pardon for the intervention. For people who don't know what GAWI is, we're talking about get a word in edgeways. Yeah.
yes, get a
Carry on.
word,
Carry
yes,
on, love.
get a word. If you can, while I'm talking, get a word in edgeways. We're three storytellers. Get a word in edgeways if you can. So, so Bowie for short. So David was there launching these two books of A Foot in Two Worlds, I think it's called. I've got it beside me here actually. Where is it? A Traveller in Two Worlds, even. It's all about Duncan and his relationship with David Campbell. And he was told that I tell a lot of Duncan stories, as does Amy Douglas. And he pulled me to one side and said, do you have a little short story that we could start my piece off, before I do my talk? I said, I'd love to. So I told Thomas the Thatcher, and he came to me afterwards, he'd give it his thing. And he said, I really loved how you told that story. He said, you told it how Duncan would tell it. And then about 3 weeks after that, I got an email from him and said, at the Scottish Storytelling Festival this coming year, he said, we're doing a tribute to Duncan Williamson. Would you like to come up and tell two stories? Well, we know what the answer was. It was yes, of course. So I went and stayed with David Campbell for a week in his lovely flat in Edinburgh. And I met Linda Williamson. Amy Douglas came up, and their two daughters, and Heather Yule was there. David couldn't perform because he was very unwell. He was having the end of COVID. And Jimmy, Duncan's son, Jimmy Williamson, was there too. And we just delivered stories, and Heather played a bit of the harp and what have we. And it was just fabulous. Um, and you just think, this boy from a council estate, you just think, how did I get there to tell stories of probably my favourite storyteller? How did I get to tell two of his stories, at the Edinburgh Storytelling Festival? How did that happen? And it's the love of stories. That's how it happened. It's because I love stories. Yeah. So hopefully I've answered the question.
You have indeed. And while you were mentioning your fear, your initial fear of exposure, I could see the resonance on Simona's face. I was watching her while you were describing this because I know she's been going through the same, and she has overcome her fears a lot in the process. She's following after your footsteps, I'd say, Shane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know what Simona did. I can relate it to, apart from the singing, there was one other thing that's just come to mind that I'd momentarily forgotten. I did two ancestor courses, 2 long weekends at Emerson School of Storytelling with Stella Casamatti and Pellin. Um, and they were about 3 months apart. And we actually had a cohort. We went around several places. We went to Amsterdam and Den Haag, and we told these ancestor stories in London and Cambridge, and where have we. And part of that ancestor work was when you tell a story, all the people that love you and your ancestors who are really rooting for you, they're all literally just behind your shoulders, supporting you. They're going, you can do this, Shane. And that I used to need to go into that headspace to help me over my nerves, and that really shifted something. And the other one that helped me was the other I read somewhere, one of my books about storytelling, is the fear that we have. It's an energy, and if we can encapsulate the energy and use it as a positive energy, we're using our nerves in a positive way. Now, I don't think that's easy, but I think if we think of it like that, this is, instead of going, oh, I'm really scared. It's like, oh, it's giving me the energy. It's how we compute it in our heads. Oh, it's giving me the energy to tell a story. So that's how I think of it. It's giving me the energy to tell a story. I still get slightly nervous. Don't get me wrong, but it doesn't. It doesn't. I can't think what the word is. I was going to say decapitate me. That's not what I meant. It's a word like that.
It
But
doesn't inhibit
it
you.
disable. It doesn't disable me, I think is what I was going to say. It doesn't disable me, but it reminds me that this is serious now. You're going to deliver a story, so give it your best, kind of thing.
Yeah. it really resonates with me because many storytellers out there are just ready to tell a story whenever like to talk to people, whereas I like you said, I'm quite shy. I don't usually talk to people if I can avoid it.
Yeah.
And but it's just the love of stories, and passing these stories, telling these stories, sharing these stories. So I can really see myself in what you said. And since you told us that you really, really love stories, and that your first teacher told you you must tell stories, would you like to tell us a story, Shane?
Yeah, yes, I'll tell you another story. I don't know if I don't know if Despina has heard this story or not, but anyway, I'm going to tell it anyway. So I come from
I'm
a
like
place.
a, I'm like a child, Shane. I
Okay,
always like to hear the same stories over and over again.
okay. So I was going to tell a Duncan story, but I don't think I am. I'm in a different energy space, so I'm going to tell another story that I love. I come from a town called Bury St Edmunds, and that's a story just in that name, which I'm not going to go into. But it's a market town, and it's been a market town for years and years, hundreds of years. There's a cattle market or an animal market, and there's also a butter market where you can buy all sorts of things. And they've existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. And they're, back in the day, most of these places like that would have had a hiring market where if you needed work, you would go there and, the local kind of squires or the farm owner, the farmer would come and be looking for labor, basically. So this is where you would go to find your labor, this market, And if you were a man that was strong in arm, you would get employed quite quickly because they needed manual labor in those days. And if you were fair of face and a woman, you would get employed quite quickly to be a servant or something. I'm sorry, but that's how it was back in those days. And the odd child might be employed to do something. And back in the day, you were sent out to work at a very young age. I was working at 15 myself, actually, and it'd be even younger back in the day. And children worked. We know this. Children had to work as well. And if you come from a big family, you'd have to work. And this young lad, I don't know how old he was, but maybe 12 or 13, something like that. But he was told to go and find work, basically. Get to Bury, get to the market. He lived out in the country, so get to the market, get yourself some work. Don't come back until you've got some employment to bring some money into the house because the family was struggling. And he went to the market, and there was people there. And of course, the strong men got chosen, and the fairer faced women got chosen, and one or two children got chosen. And then the other people didn't get any work. And this lad didn't get because he was a scrawny little thing, you know, didn't know much. And so he had no work, but he knew he couldn't go back home. His father said, "Do not come back home until you have work." So he wondered, well, what am I going to do? Um, And well, what you do when you don't know what to do, many of us we just walk and think. And he just walked, and he left Bury out into all that beautiful countryside around Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk, and he just walked down lanes and what have we. Slept under a hedge one night and whatever, and he just carried on walking. He just didn't know what to do, and he was at his wit's end. And then one evening he was walking, and he came across a cottage on the edge of a little wood, and he thought, oh, maybe there's someone that can help me because I haven't eaten for a day and I'm tired and I'm thirsty. And he went and he kind of knocked on the door. The door opened, and this, well, sweet old man opened the door. Wasn't so tall, quite slim, a ruddy face, whiskers, white whiskers, kind of tweed clothing and what have we, but a cheery face and these lovely piercing blue eyes. And he said, how can I help you, lad? And he said, I haven't got any work and I can't go home. And I haven't eaten for a day. Could I have a piece of bread, please? Well, I can do better than that for you, boy. He said, come in, come in. And he sat him down at the table, and he gave him a big meat stew to eat. He kind of ate that, and he had some water to drink and whatever. And they just got chatting about this and about that. And the evening came, and the old man said, boy, he said, you can stay here the night. He said, I have a spare bedroom. He said, you can stay here the night and we'll talk about what to do tomorrow. Oh, thank you, he said. Well, the evening sort of wore on a little bit. There was a fire. And the old man, he had a fiddle hanging up on his wall, a violin, a fiddle. And he took it down and he said, well, give us a song, boy. And he began to play. And the boy said, oh, I don't know no songs, sir. Oh, never mind, lad. He said, I'll play a jig. He said, give us a dance. And he began to play. And the boy said, I don't know any dances, sir. Oh, okay, he said. He put the violin down. He said, tell us a story then, boy. I don't know any stories, sir. I'm sorry. Never mind, said the old man. And the old man picked up the violin and he played a jig and he sang a song and he even told the boy a story. Anyway, the night wore on and it was time to sleep. And the old man said, I'll show you your room, he said. There's not much in there. And there was a bed and a chair. And there was a little door, a press, what we call a press, like a little wardrobe thing built into the wall. Only about, well, I'm showing you with my fingers as a podcast, only about 9 inches deep where you could hang your one suit that you had. We call it a press. He said, you can put your jacket in there, boy. He said, have a good sleep. He said, I'll give you breakfast in the morning. Oh, thank you, mister, he said, and the boy closed the door. And he laid on the bed and he's sort of laying there with his hands behind his head. He's thinking, oh, this is all right. He said, I've been fed. And he's sort of looking around and, well, being a young lad, he couldn't resist having a look in the press because there was nothing else to do in there. There's no books or nothing. So he went to the press and he opened the press and he jumped back because in this press, on the coat hook, was a dead sheep hanging. He thought, phew. He said, well, I know these Suffolk folk are strange. He said, but that's the strangest thing I ever did see. Well, he closed the door and he lay back on the bed and he thought, whoa, it gave me the chill, that did he? He thought, well. Anyway, he's laying back on that bed. A little bit of time passed and the door clicked to the bedroom and he sort of opened his eyes slightly in the night light. He's just sort of squinting and looking and two men walked into the bedroom silently. They went to the press, they opened the door and they took the sheep down and they carried the sheep out. And the young lad's seeing this and he's thinking, oh, they're stealing the sheep. If I don't do something, the old man will think I've stolen the sheep, and then I'll have to go and see the judge, and I might get deported or something. And I'm going to have to see what they're doing with the sheep. So he got up and he went outside and he began to follow these two men down the lane. And there they were carrying the sheep away. And he's hiding behind the elm trees and dodging in the bushes and he's kind of going along. And he sticks his head out to look round the elm tree just when the men had put the sheep down to have a rest because it was a heavy old sheep. One of the men happened to turn around and saw the boy. You little bugger, they said. And they chased him. Well, this young lad, he ran and ran and ran down the lane and these two men were starting to catch up with him. Well, the young lad ran as fast as he possibly could and he ended up running along this riverbank. Well, riverbanks are slippery. And this poor lad lost his footing and slipped and he went straight into the river. The river was in spate and it took him along and he struggled and he grabbed hold of these reeds to kind of stop himself. And the next thing he knew, he woke up and there he was laying on the floor with all the bed sheets all wrapped around him. And he thought, what's going on? He thought, what a dream that was. Well, anyway, the next thing he heard was the pans going and he could smell the bacon frying and the sausage and the egg and whatever. And then the old man said, there's something to eat now, boy. Come you through. He went through and there was this lovely plate of food, breakfast put in front of him and a cup of tea. He sat down and he's eating his breakfast and he put his knife and fork down when he'd finished. And he looked at the old man and the old man looked across at him and he met his eyes. And the old man said to him, I bet you got a story now, haven't you, boy?
Brilliant.
I'm hungry. Eggs and bacon. So, Shane, if anyone should be interested in contacting you, hopefully for some paid job, how could they get to you?
Yeah, so I always forget I think on my oh what's my website called? Storyteller Shane, I think it's called. So I haven't. I should have got more prepared. I haven't got it with me, and it's downstairs. But if you look up Shane Ibbs, I'm on Facebook. I have got a website which tells you a lot more about my journey and stuff. I'm on Instagram, so all those kind of things. But if you just Google Shane Ibbs, I think that would probably take you to my, or certainly Shane Ibbs Storyteller would take you to my website. Yeah,
Cool,
and I
great.
do,
So we
do
can.
schools, festivals, and all manner of things in between. All sorts of storytelling. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and Shane tells stories not just for children, of course, also stories for adults. Absolutely.
Yeah, yes, I do some story clubs. I was in the last storytelling club a few weeks back. I went to Surrey Storytellers and did some stories there. I did Bearskin. Well, I did several stories, but Bearskin is a story I've worked on for several years, and I've expanded the story, but in a way, it's still within the context of the story. Because for me, it's a PTSD story because it's about a soldier and what
Yeah.
happens to him, the deal with the devil, and I've got PTSD in my head when I think of it, and I've done a lot of work on it, a lot of research, and I told the story. I won't name the person, but I told the story, and one of the people there, one of the men, afterwards said, "Whoa, that brought me to the edge of tears." That story, and
Well,
that's kind of what we want to do as storytellers
yeah,
is
exactly.
give you some emotion, whether you're crying or laughing, or anything in between. That's hopefully what we do. Yeah.
That brings me back to one of my earlier thoughts when you were talking about somebody mentioning that when you started storytelling and you were told you should tell stories, you were told that you were already good, and you asked yourself, how can you tell that a person is
Yes.
already in a particular level, and they after that they should just expand on their skills. I'd say that when I think that a storyteller is good for me, first of all, they hold my attention. This is the first um, sign of recognition. And after that, most important, I think, is that I can see it is clear as the day that their heart is in there. They're not just
Yes.
telling the story, they're not telling somebody else's story. Somehow it resonates within themselves, their
Yes.
heart and their fears and their loves. And you can see the connection. And if you have that connection to the story, you can give it out to people, you pass the message.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. And for some reason, this I often tell stories that I love. One of the things I learned is tell the stories that you love, that really speak to you. Um, but because I believe the stories.
Hmm. Hmm.
A talking rabbit or a talking, rhinoceros. I believe that's really happening, and I probably attribute that to some of the TV that I've watched over the years. I have to say, with cartoons back in the day, in the 60s and 70s. But also, I think because I read a lot, but also I've been around animals a lot and people a lot. And the cafe that I mentioned, I used to go to that cattle market in Bury St Edmunds. When it was in the town, it's on the outskirts now. It used to be in the town. It's an integral part of the town. I used to go there on a regular basis around all the pens and look at all the animals and watch them being auctioneered. And so I tell Mary and the Black Bull, which is a Duncan story, and she goes to the market to find a creature to look after, to nurse. Well, I am in that market in Bury St Edmunds, and what I described to you is exactly what I saw as a child. So, I am so believable because I'm telling you the truth, actually. I was there. I saw those things. I smelt those smells, um, etc., etc. So it's really real for me. So I'm not having to put it on. I'm not having to fake it. It's real.
Absolutely. And
um,
as we often say in this podcast, Shane, you're going to love this. All stories are true, and some of them even happened.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess, being serious for a moment, I think from a mental health perspective, I think
Mhm.
stories, the right stories, are so nourishing for us. If they take us away from our day-to-day troubles and tribulations and worries and take us into that magic land, oh boy, are they doing a job. And this is why I love stories so much, because it does that to me when I tell the stories, but also when I listen to certain storytellers in particular. they take me to this magic land. And I've got a list. I did a little bit of homework. I just want to do this just out of etiquette, really. Of There's probably more than the ones I've mentioned that I'm going to mention, but these are the storytellers that really take me to the magic place. And this is in no particular order of how good or whatever they are. I don't think of them like that. But these are the people who take me to the magic land really quickly. Paul Jackson, Helen East, Hugh Lupton, Nick Hennessy, Maria Gillan, Ricky Palanen, the Finnish storyteller, and Despina. I have to say that star story that you told at the East Anglian Storytelling Festival, that took me to the magic place. So, so because when that happens, I am so there in the story. I am there, and nothing else is going on for me other than the story, and I call that the magic place because it gives you so much, gives you so much. And you might go through a load of emotions. I am an emotional guy. It might take you through a load of emotions, but you're in that safe place of the story containing you. Um, and I think it's so therapeutic. It's I often say, I don't say it so much, but I think because I'm doing this podcast, I will say it today, is it probably saved my mental health, actually. My youngest brother died um, a few years back. I think was it I'm terrible at keeping dates in my head because of deaths. It's because it's too sad to do. But I think it was something like 11 or 12 years ago. And storytelling saved my mental health. And I often think of him before I tell a story. I kind of almost do it in as some sort of honoring of him. And there's two stories that I tell. I'm not going to say which ones they are. There's two stories that I tell where there's two death scenes. No, one's a death scene and one's a potential loss scene. And really, I'm telling you about my brother, but also about me and my emotion. And and that's important to me because it's a very tender moment. And in an audience, when I work with an audience, there's some people that really look at me in a certain way, and I know that we both know what I'm talking about. Not necessarily my brother, but death or loss or grief. It's that moment is so special. Um, you just kind of get that connection, and it's a wonderful thing when it happens because you're speaking to each other in a funny kind of way. Um, I also get
Just
it with
put it,
comedy.
I'd say
So
just put your heart out there on the table. Yeah.
yes,
You
yes,
have all your
yes,
cards open or whatever. It's the same for me. I've gone through difficult times through stories, through the divorce and then my mom's death, and they were 2 months apart. So it was
yes,
one strike after the next. It was compacted, and I went through this very rough period, doing my own psychotherapy through the stories I chose
okay,
to tell, or they chose me to tell them, as
yes,
other storytellers put it. So yeah, I totally get what you said. But on that very note, talking about mental health, our next episode is going to be our muse in the next episode is going to be one of the tellers I had tell in Get Award in 8 Ways in October.
hmm,
And he's a very young fellow, very natural storyteller, and he put me in that magical space you just described. So
yeah,
next one coming is Kestrel Morton. It's going
oh
to be a
yeah, lovely
lovely
person, yeah,
interview. I'm looking forward to that.
yeah,
But I'm not there yet. I'm still here. So thank you very much for being here with us. It was lovely to chat with you.
yeah. I've enjoyed it.
Thank
I
you so
really have.
much. Thank you very much for everything you've shared with us and for being our first muse on our first episode of
Yeah,
the
I feel quite
second
honoured. Thank
season.
you, thank you. And I've spoken
And
from the heart. It's
yeah,
lovely
yeah,
because I
exactly.
because
Then
I
there's this red thread going around all our little hearts right now.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely. It's a wonderful thing, and it's if you find the right people, the community of storytellers is just a wonderfully supportive place as well, and nurturing and holding and whatever. Yeah, yeah, some lovely people out there for sure. Yeah, and just to give Gowie or get a word in edgeways, a final from me anyway. Wasn't it great this autumn up there?
it's been great every time. I cannot compare one time to the other. I always enjoy it thoroughly. And Mike Rust asked me, "Are you going to be there are you going to be here? Because I was there next year. And I said, let's put it this way. I cannot not come.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I hope
yeah.
Simona will make it one day, 1 October. Thank you, Shane, for a wonderful first episode of Tell Muses Season 2.
Thank you very
Bye,
much. I've enjoyed it.
guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very
Bye.
much.